All right. This video, I said that I was going to do this. Jazz hands. I said that I was going to do this seasonally, and I'm sticking to it. So I did autumn recommendations, and so now we're doing winter book recs. Books that are perfect to read when it's dark at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay. I like the darkness though. I'm one of those people, like, this is my time of the year. I like it when it gets dark early, and I understand why other people don't. It is depressing, like, don't get me wrong. I like it though. I like it when it's cold, dark, and miserable outside. Like, it's my vibe. It's my vibe. I said this in a previous video. I'd rather deal with winter than summer any day. I don't like it when it's oppressively hot. I love snow. I love snow. I love super cold weather. And I think the reason why is because I spent a portion of my childhood in New England. And there's just something, like, as a kid, when you live in a place that's guaranteed snow annually, not so much anymore when I used to live where I used to live, they're not getting the snow they used to get. Sad. But I mean, I lived in an area that was so used to snow that very rarely were you missing school. It had to be like a whiteout blizzard, which they're cool to ski, but whiteout blizzard with, snow, sleet, freezing rain. Other than that, you're going to school. You wake up and the streets are plowed. But I think one reason why I'm just very, very fond of the winter and the cold is because some of my favorite memories are from when it's freezing outside. And I'm still of the firm belief, if you layer properly, you're going to be hot. I don't care if it's negative 10 degrees outside. Let's dive into this list. I am, as usual, ad-libbing it. I'm winging it. I have had this list pending for quite some time, but many of these books I have not read in a while, minus a couple. And these are all bangers, you guys. I've got some good ones in here. It's a blend of mainly classics, and actually, it's a majority of classics, and there's some lint. This is what happens when you're a knitter. I just have, like, yarn everywhere, like fragments of it. These are all classics, and some of the more contemporary releases, there's literally only 2 of them. They've been around and they're so beloved that they're contemporary classics at this point. They're in no particular order. I'm diving right in. And as you could expect, you're going to see a small handful of the Russians here. Want to know why? Because it's cold out. It's cold in Russia. Russia gets cold. I need to calm down. My boy D Money, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. The main character here spends quite a bit of time being cold. And he's also sick, and he committed a murder. So, Crime and Punishment. Again, I'm not going to do massive synopses on each of these books. I'm going to try to, get through them pretty quickly. But I read Crime and Punishment now a couple of years ago with one of my best friends, and she and I read it together. And, man. So, long story short, the main character commits a murder, and he goes crazy. Like, he snaps after this murder, and it does a number on his psyche. But then eventually, the way that he had the resolution of it, and again, it's typical Dostoevsky. There is a lot of grace after all of this suffering, and this man goes down this mental rabbit hole after he commits this egregious crime, and he also falls in love with this young woman, and it's also through this young woman that part of his grace and redemption happens. So. And again, it's cold outside, clearly, in the majority of this novel. And it's dark and kind of grimy, and it's a bit claustrophobic in some ways. And so I think Crime and Punishment is perfect to read in the winter months. I do have a review on this, actually, written. It was about a year before I started my YouTube channel. So I am going to do a review on this book because I have no idea when I'm going to reread it, but clearly there's quite a bit to discuss here. I will do a review and pull this one out of the vault, if you will. We're gonna, again, no particular order. We're jumping to the Victorians. There's a decent amount of Victorians in here as well. I got 4 of them. One of them being Villette by Charlotte Bronte. Jane Eyre is my favorite novel of all time. Of all time! That's actually an NFL quote. Name that Green Bay Packers player, or was it the Jets? No, it was the Jets. It was a player on the Jets. This was ages ago, so he's been retired. He was like, of all time. If you know, you know. New York Jets. Drop it down below. I'm not a Jets fan, but that went viral. That's the only reason why I know that. Because I'm not a Jets fan. I forget the Jets exist. Shots fired. Villette. Villette is really, as much as I love Jane Eyre, and Jane Eyre is my favorite book of all time, Villette, in my opinion, is Charlotte Bronte's masterpiece. This was her last novel published before her passing. And at this point in this novel, when Charlotte is writing this, all of her siblings have passed away. Charlotte Bronte had quite a difficult life, as short as it was. She had a hard life. And when you know the context in which she was writing this, to me, the melancholia, which is heavier than you, the melancholia and how dense this is, and why she's talking so much, the religion in here and the faith in here and all of it, and her grieving, you can feel it in this novel. And you have this, again, a young woman who leaves England to go to France to be a governess, and she's so lonely, and she falls in love with the man, and she falls in love with the man who doesn't love her back. And she's kind of reading through and over-interpreting his behavior, right? But her love story, if you will, this is not a romance by any means, but this is a woman who's clearly seeking something in this story. Her name is, what is the main character's name? It's been that long. Lucy. I thought her name is Lucy. Lucy Snow. What a name, right? Cheeky. But yes, there is a slight, again, there are gothic elements to this as well. It's a bit of a magical realism, if you will, but it's just, this is a dense text. I'm not going to lie. Now I will say this, the ending of this book was rewritten or redone because apparently her ending was like not happy. And so her editor was like, can you soften this up a bit? But Charlotte was grieving when she was writing this, and it's evident. And again, it's cold outside. There's snow. She's in France. It's a very cold novel. It's a sad novel. And I really, really, really need to reread this. This is chunky. Now, again, this is dense. And I highly recommend that you get a version that has footnotes versus endnotes, because there's a lot of French here and it's not translated. And so get an edition that translates it at the footnotes if you can, so that you don't have to go back and forth between the endnotes if you are not, like me, fluent in French. I have no French at all. So highly recommend Villette. I think it's underread. And it's, again, like I said, as much as I love Jane Eyre, Villette is her masterpiece, in my opinion. One of my favorite classics of all time, A Tale of Two Cities by my boy Charles Dickens. My boy Chuck is what I call him. I call Dostoevsky D-Money. Charles Dickens is my boy Chuck. He's a rapper. And I get it. Charles Dickens is not for everybody. He's long-winded. He talks too much. He does. That's my critique. Bro, you talk too much. But A Tale of Two Cities, it is iconic. Let me just read this to you, because I read this before the world shut down in 2020, and it couldn't have been more perfect timing. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on it being received, for good or for evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only. Icon. What an icon. A Tale of Two Cities is taking place during, what war is it? England and France are at war. Again, is it Napoleonic Wars? It's a Napoleonic War. Napoleon. Okay. So you have war going on and these political tensions. And in a nutshell, because I find this book fairly hard to describe, and I'm going to need to reread this. I need to hurry up because I got several more books to discuss. But when I was first reading this book, I remember when I first picked this book up in the winter of 2020, we hadn't shut down yet. And I was like, where is this going? And I went through the whole book thinking it was going to be a 3 out of 5 for me because I just could not piece together what he was doing. There's a reason why. There are knitters in this story, but also this is what Dickens is doing. He's knitting together stitch by stitch the plot, and it's not going to make sense to you perfectly until the end. It's the end of it. And it is, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful portrayals of what unconditional sacrificial love is between human beings. When you have a person who is willing to just be unconditional towards somebody else at their own expense, literally sacrificial love. I cried. I'm not going to lie. At the end of this book, I was like, when I finished this book, I stared at a wall and I had to go get a tissue because it was beautiful. The ending, just when another person loves and trusts somebody else so much that they'll sacrifice everything for them. And that type of relationship is very, very difficult to find. It's very rare. But again, it does take place in winter. It's cold. It's typical Dickens. It's grungy. And it is just perfect to read when it's freezing outside. And it's iconic. It's iconic. I consider this now a contemporary American classic, Cold Mountain. The name is self-explanatory. I have talked about Cold Mountain before. I'm sliding. Did this get a little bit more crooked? That's right. I have talked about Cold Mountain before. It is one of my favorite pieces of contemporary literature. And I consider this on par with the Odyssey plot-wise. So you have a man Inman, he's deserted the Confederate Army during the American Civil War. And he walks from Virginia, I believe it's Petersburg, Virginia, actually, Richmond or Petersburg, Virginia. They're not far apart. And he walks, I believe, from central Virginia to South Carolina, I want to say it's South Carolina. I've read this twice. And on his walk to the woman that he loves. And he, along the way, comes across these mythical, bizarre characters, and it's like reading a fever dream sometimes. I'm like, is he hallucinating this? Is this real? This book is so good. It is beautifully written. I need to reread this again and do a proper review. But as you can tell, this was before I even annotated anything. It's been a while since I've read this. But the first time I read Cold Mountain, I read it in 2014 between Christmas and New Year's, and it was perfect. Now, this is a movie. The movie does not do this book justice at all. Do not base the book off the movie. But it is just, you have to read that book in the winter just because of the setting alone. A lot of Inman's time spent walking at night because, again, he can't get caught. He's a deserter of the Confederate Army. And so he's walking and it's cold and he's going through the Blue Ridge Mountains and it's just chef's kiss. Beowulf. This version is translated by Seamus Haney. I'm glad I reread Beowulf. I reread Beowulf, I want to say in 2022. I almost sneezed there. This is a Nordic, Danish, if you will, Scandinavian classic. I mean, this is iconic also, isn't it? And also, because it's Beowulf, I credit Beowulf for modern fantasy as it is today, in my opinion. But I mean, you have Beowulf, he's such an icon of a hero, right? And there's this monster named Grendel who's been a terror, and it's Beowulf's the biggest, the baddest warrior, right? And he's the one who takes Grendel out. But, there's also Grendel's mama. And so this is the epic hero and his epic death. And again, it's mythological in a way. It's fantastical in some ways. Again, I think it's really the grandfather, the great-great-grandfather of modern fantasy. There are some mythological characters in here that remind me of the others in Game of Thrones. And it's an epic poem. It's not difficult. And I think you just like that classic masculine heroism. You have to credit Beowulf. Oh, and I think it's only appropriate to read it when it's winter outside. This is taking place in a very cold place. I mean, it's the Danes. It's cold. It's cold up there. Which is my segue to Game of Thrones. I mean, winter is coming. Of course, the whole series, but I pulled the first one. I've read this twice. Next year, as in 2025, I will be reading Storm of Swords. So, I mean, winter is coming. Everybody knows Games of Thrones. Everybody knows Game of Thrones. I don't even need to elaborate. Winter is coming. Let's get to some more Dickens. We can't talk about winter reading recommendations without talking about A Christmas Carol. Okay. Obviously, it's Christmas time. I mean, come on, Scrooge. Now, this particular edition is the Vintage Classics edition. Does have two of Dickens' other short Christmas stories. I thought they were mediocre, to be honest. I thought they were boring. But A Christmas Carol is in here, and it's been adapted so many times that when you go back to the original source material, it's always worth a read, right? And it's so quick to get through. It's not very long at all, but A Christmas Carol. It's typical Victorian. It's typical Victorian Dickens literature. It's a short story. It's iconic. Need I say more? I had to throw a little Christmas in there, right? Bleak House. I read Bleak House in 2021. So I have a video review of this because I read it right before I started my channel, and I read it during the winter. This is a doorstopper. It's over 1,000 pages long. It is also one of my favorite Dickens that I've read thus far. It is, again, cold. It's taking place in London. There's some London slums going on. And again, in typical Dickensian fashion, he is, the plights of the poor and the working class man versus the rich. And there's a legal proceeding taking place. Was there a murder? No, sorry. I'm still thinking about Crime and Punishment. There is a legal proceeding taking place, and it is darkly comedic in a lot of ways. And of course, with typical Dickens, there are a lot of subplots going on, but I found that the subplots in this particular Dickens, for some reason, were not hard to follow. Sometimes I can find his subplots unnecessary. I have a love-hate relationship with my boy Chuck, but I do understand his brilliance. And he's got your classic female character that's perfect. And he's got your classic villains. I mean, he has a formula, but this is a gray, dark novel. One more Dostoevsky, Notes from Underground. I read this in 2020. I think I read this in 2023. I did. Again, a slim volume, but dense. I think. I don't necessarily find this to be the easiest to read, but you could almost, in my opinion, that you could kind of classify this as a philosophical novel. But you have Notes from Underground. You've got this guy your narrator, he's in his hole. He's this extreme introvert. He doesn't really like people. Relatable. And he can't fit in, and he's isolated, and you're in the claustrophobia of his thoughts. Some of his opinions are unsavory, but what's so brilliant about Dostoevsky is that these are thoughts that a lot of us have. We just wouldn't admit to. Most of us wouldn't admit to them. And Dostoevsky says the quiet part. D-Money says the quiet part out loud, and it's so relatable. And you're like, well, somebody had to say it. He's not wrong. And so it's a slim volume. Again, it's dark, it's claustrophobic in its thought, and I just think that it is perfect to read when you're in that slowness of winter. You know what I mean? Vibes. Like I said in my autumn reads, I picked these books on vibes. I got 3 more here. I said I got 2 more Russian novels here. I had to bring out Tolstoy. Had to bring out Tolstoy. Napoleonic Wars again. War and Peace. I know. Look at it. Look at it. This is a blunt object. I read War and Peace in 6 weeks when I read it. I wish I could read that fast now. I read War and Peace November, December of 2022. I also had a look. I timed it perfectly because that year for Thanksgiving, we drove to Maine. So when I read this, I timed it perfectly. I had a long road trip to Maine, and so I had a lot of time spent in a car. So I knocked out a good portion of War and Peace in a vehicle. I do think War and Peace is iconic. It's a brilliant piece of work. And there's just something about Russian lit. You gotta read it when it's cold outside because it's Russia. It's cold there. Very cold. Of course, Napoleonic Wars again. And this thing is hefty. And, oh man, War and Peace is so dynamic. You've got the domestic side of it, the war side of it. You've got all these complicated relationships and how all of these characters connect to each other. And you've got romance and you've got war and you've got fighting and you've got battle and combat at the same time. This is when a lot of these books also I've picked because maybe they're going to take some time to digest. Villette, War and Peace. You're going to have to sit with this because this is also a philosophical novel in my opinion. Dostoevsky, Tale of Two Cities, Bleak House, Crime and Punishment. A lot of times people are on leave during this time of the year for holidays. They're taking time off. You've got use or lose leave. You've got the holidays. And it's especially that time between Christmas and New Year's. Most of us are sitting around. We're not at work. Most of us are sitting around, stuffing our faces with leftovers, staring at a wall. Just trying to decompress. Perfect time to read some of these chunky, squishy novels. So squishy. War and Peace. Now, actually, I prefer Anna Karenina over War and Peace. I read Anna Karenina again before the world shut down in 2020. And again, it's Russia. It's cold. There's politics. There's not as much, it's not as nearly as political as War and Peace by any means, but you do have the Russian aristocracy here. Dostoevsky. Tolstoy deals way more with the upper class, the upper echelons of Russian society, and Dostoevsky is dealing with the grunginess, in my opinion. Dostoevsky's going to get grungy and raw, whereas Tolstoy, a man with his own vices for sure, an author with his own vices, but I feel like he's dealing more with the upper echelons. And so we've got Anna Kay, who's in a adulterous relationship, and how that adulterous relationship plays out within this upper Russian society, right? You have this well-known woman, married name, because of who she's married to, and she cheats on her husband. And the fallout from that. Her husband, I think, does not get enough credit. What a saint. My goodness. But it's this is more of a familial no, War and Peace has a lot of family dynamics in it. But there's something to me about Anna Karenina that just sits with me better. I don't know what it is. I just prefer it over War and Peace. I need to reread this again. Again, this was in 2020. 2 years before I started my YouTube channel. And so this is one of those classics I need to reread. But I mean, there's also ice skating and there's holidays and parties and soirees and all that stuff going on. Again, perfect to read for when it's -2 degrees outside. That's a door stopper. Last but certainly not least, the cliche of all cliches. Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. This is my favorite Daphne du Maurier that I've read. If you like Charlotte Bronte and Emily Bronte, you're going to like Jamaica Inn. You have a young lady who goes to Jamaica Inn. Again, this is taking place in the winter months. And she goes to this creepy house. It's quite gothic in a lot of ways, even though this was published in 1936. I believe this is taking place in Cornwall, England. And the main character, she goes to stay at this creepy house to work. And again, this is one I need to reread. I read it in 2019, but she falls in love with this man who's a bit unsavory, but and how that whole thing plays out while she's with this creepy. She's staying with this creepy. She has some extended family that I believe it's an aunt and an uncle, and her uncle. Oof, creepy, and it's claustrophobic in a lot of ways. The house is creepy. The uncle is creepy. You don't know if you really trust this man that she's fallen in love with and she's having this liaison with, right? But I read this in August of 2019. Wrong time of the year to read it. We got to read it in the winter because it ends at the Christmas holiday. And so, again, if you like, a lot of people during this time of year read like those cozy Christmas stories, those cozy Christmas romances. That's just not me. I'm just not a romance reader. But if you like it darker and grungier, these were my dark, grungy recommendations. So anyway, have you read any of these books, or are they on your to-read list? What are the books that you've kind of typically gravitated towards during, let me put this down, during this time of the year, during the winter months? So those are my recs. I will remember to do spring and summer when that pops up. And I'm going to keep this rolling and do fresh lists for each year. So anyway, those are my recs. Thoughts and comments below. Feel free to like, subscribe, and also follow me on Instagram where I get up to more bookish shenanigans. I post all of my book content there first, and I like to post the occasional goofy thing in the Instagram stories because I can do what I want. This is my platform. That's all. I'm going to sign out. Bye.